Well, welcome to the last of our conversations on this book of Henri Nouwen, The Life of the Beloved. George Marchinkowski and Rod Botsis having a conversation about something we both enjoy, a person that we have in common, a set of books that we've read to our great enjoyment and spiritual nourishment. And here we are again, looking for the fourth time at Life of the Beloved. Welcome, Rod. Nice to see you.
Lovely to be with you, George. Especially lovely to look at this topic of giving with someone who is a giver. And bless you and Sasha for being that. It's lovely.
So just to recap for those who are watching our video clips, we began this book looking at, and it's a peculiar book that Henri has written because it's written to a non-spiritual person. No, maybe I shouldn't say a non-spiritual person, but somebody who doesn't really connect with religion. He's a Jew, but doesn't really attend synagogue often and doesn't see much in it. Fred Bratman was his name, and Henri is writing to him, hoping to engage with him and choosing for his topic to identify who we are in God, how God sees us. And I was thinking this week, Rod, it's fine and well to talk about the beloved, and especially in terms of, people who've read the Bible and have read that baptismal section. I know in Matthew's Gospel it's around chapter 4. And the voice, you are my beloved, spoken of Jesus.
Yes.
And perhaps those that know the prodigal son story in Luke 15 will also identify with us. But maybe for others, just a reminder that in the beginning, in the Genesis account, when all things have been created, God says they are good. And when humankind is created, God says, this is very good.
Yes.
And so we often think of ourselves in terms of sin, but I think God knows a story that precedes sin, not so?
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. I've got two great saints in the church who think theologically very soundly, wisely, read a lot, and they say, get so tired of you reform guys telling us we're sinners, I think deep down we are more good than bad because that's the way God made us. Yeah. And that's why we rest so much, George, when goodness is done to us. It seems just fitting. Yes. It's like, this is lovely in the world. And when we do goodness and people respond to it, we just think, however humble we may be, there's also a fittingness about it.
Yes.
It's damn hard to be ugly and evil and perpetuate that and sustain that. It's very hard.
Yeah, quite right. And we should also not feel uneasy about allowing God to call us the beloved.
Yeah. No, when that gets click, when that goes click in your head and your soul, it's just a safe, lovely, lovely, lovely place to be. Yeah.
Just as an aside, I remember once being invited to put on a short series, I think it was about 4 or 5 sessions, on Celtic spirituality, going back to the Celts in Scotland and Ireland and so on, and talking about what they believed. This is pre-Rome, because Rome sort of came in and through Anselm of Canterbury and so on, the Celtic church was destroyed. But one of the major points of contention between Rome and the Celtic church was that the Celts basically believed that we were good, and the Romans, the Western church, from which Presbyterians also come, so we have adopted that from Augustine, believed that actually we were bad, the massa damnata, we were the mess damned. Now, of course, both of these things are true, but they could not coexist. And so the Western Church snuffed out the Celts, for that, among other reasons. Isn't it interesting? It just can't cope with the notion that human beings are, in fact, good before they're evil. Anyway, on to today. We're looking at the communion motif, or the simple meal that's shared. The loaf is taken. We've spoken about being taken or chosen as humans, as friends of Jesus, as followers of Christ. We spoke about being blessed, and every spiritual blessing in Christ, Paul tells the Ephesians, is ours already, fait accompli, done. and God's chosen that, and he doesn't sort of, remove it when we displease him. But then the third instance, we spoke the whole session last time about the brokenness. Now today, we want to talk about the last of the actions. And it occurred to me, and I think I mentioned it at the end of the last session, that if you spoke about the first three only, this book of Henry's would be a very individualistic book, because I am personally chosen, as are you. I am personally blessed, and I feel that blessing, and I can see the evidence in my life. And I've also know my brokenness, and that is a very personal thing. And in some instances, not only personal but particular.
Yeah.
But the givenness forces me out of the me into the us and the we.
Yes. So what's great here is that it wasn't just Henry who thought of this, but it literally came from Jesus. And in the doing of this, we remember him, and we've got to have all four of those and reach this place of being a beloved giver and a blessed giver.
Yes.
Very cool.
So we are given, and that's so fundamental to us. It's one of the four things. It's inextricably linked to the actions. The actions are not complete until the giving out. You can imagine us standing at the communion table and taking the bread, setting it apart, and then breaking the bread, and then just putting it down and singing a hymn and going home. It's ridiculous. It's pointless.
Well, I once, to try and illustrate something about tithing to the congregation, I had 10 chocolate chip biscuits in my hand, counted them out, and then ate one, and then ate a second one, and ate a third one, and then they began to gasp. And I said, God will allow me to eat all 9 and only wants me to give away 1. But how disgusting that would be and seem. And my validity is when I give the 1, I can keep the 9. And of course, the laughter lets people see and understand.
Yes.
We are meant to give, and it's not that terribly onerous.
I might use that illustration. Hey, I'm going to steal. Because I think that would really prove the point. So you say that it's not Henry's design; it's something coming from Jesus. But I think it's probably something that's much, much older than all of that, because
Yes.
I see this going back to the covenant itself.
Yes.
And in Genesis 12, 15, and 17, God is making this contract, this agreement with humankind through Abraham, a particular branch of humankind.
Yes.
And the great discovery is that all along he didn't intend to choose this group to be special or different, or I shouldn't say different, because he did want them to be different. But he didn't want them to be special in and of themselves. He certainly wasn't creating an elite. But he was doing something with a purpose, and that was to have an instrument in his hand to bless the world. So he blesses them, and I know in the Bethel series this is very important to us, blessed to be a blessing.
Yeah.
And so it's right through the fabric, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting you go back all the way to the covenant, because Genesis 15 begins after this. So you've got to go back and plunge in and see what was this that brought Abraham to a place where he could respond to God and receive this. You're the beloved, you're blessed to be a blessing. And of course, there are a whole bunch of things, but the last thing that happens before chapter 15 is Abraham rescuing Lot and the defeat of, amongst others, the king of Sodom. And we know Abraham, as the victor, tithes to the king of Salem, which is a very peculiar act, and it's bread and wine. But the king of Sodom, defeated one, can't accept this and demands to be given back some things. And there's this complete antithetical behavior between victor Abraham, who doesn't need to give a thing to anybody, but he's giving, and defeated one who should accept his lot without punning, but immediately wants to gain more than he's ever had before, even though he's defeated. And it's after this complete difference between these two streams running through us that God cuts the covenant with Abraham.
Right. Interesting. Fascinating. So, to Henri.
Yes.
One of the points that Henri is making is that there is, in fact, inside of us, not at the base level a selfishness, but a generosity. And so one of the quotes that I picked out here from page 89, our greatest fulfillment lies in giving ourselves to others. It is sad to see that in our highly competitive and greedy world, we have lost touch with the joy of giving. True joy, happiness, and inner peace come from the giving of ourselves to others. A happy life is a life lived for others. Sorry, I think that's 85, and then 89. As the beloved ones, our greatest fulfillment lies in becoming bread for the world. So there's a sense of satisfaction that comes from giving.
Because that's how we created. I just want to go back a little bit first, George. I think on page 84, he said something like, in the giving, it becomes clear that we are chosen, blessed, broken. So just to go back to, you got to get through the whole thing. And what came to mind when I read that was when in Exodus chapter 3, when God meets with Moses and calls him, Moses wants to know, who are you? And give me some proof for this. And God says, the proof is, when this is all over, you will worship me on this mountain. It seems like a hell of an unkind thing for God to say, that the proof comes after the eating.
That's right.
So you got to get through the whole process, and that's exactly what happens here. We hear we blessed, we don't quite grasp it, but we enter into this journey where we accept that I'm forgiven, I give thanks, blessed, broken, and now I give, and I discover I am blessed because of this whole process. And so I accept the chosen, I register thanks, I endure the brokenness, and I celebrate the giving, and the miracle happens. I know again I am the blessed. I am the blessed one. So it really is very deeply, deeply seated in who we are as God has made us, body, soul, and spirit.
And I guess that's confirmed by our own experience, isn't it? Because, I mean, when one gives, when one is generous, one feels that feeling. In some ways you expect to feel hard done by because you've lost something that you thought was part of your wealth, and it ends up that you get this feeling of blessedness. That's what it is.
Well, I said at the start, I'm so pleased to have this discussion with you because you are a giver, so you understand that you're not talking about something that's just on paper. You know the joy of giving, and he makes the comment. I wrote it down here somewhere about the lack of competition, that giving in a joyful manner somehow subtracts, takes away, negates the competition, so that I don't give to get, I don't give to outgive you, I don't give that you would be embarrassed or become beholden to me in some way. I don't give to get the acknowledgement of people around me. I just give because I love to give, and I love the person I'm giving. And I'm reading a novel, George, and seriously, the last two pages I read before we started this afternoon, there is someone who is giving a little food to someone in a restaurant. He pays for something that somebody else has had, and he comments, "You always feel so nice when you pay for someone else's food." And I thought, that's really peculiar. It's absolutely peculiar that this is a secular novel and it's got absolutely nothing to do with faith. In fact, I think the author doesn't like the church at all. But this common humanity, when you've blessed someone cleanly without competition, that it's a damn nice feeling.
Yes.
Heavenly nice feeling.
Yes, quite right. Rod, help me out here a little bit. I was reading that section about gifts and talents, and he draws some sort of he compares them, but he said they're slightly different. How does that relate to Nouwen's understanding of the of being given to others?
Okay. Okay, you've tossed the ball to me. I wasn't expecting that, but I wrote some things down here about this, that the list of pure gifts that he puts down, of smiling, handshaking, kissing, embracing, the word of love, the word of encouragement, whatever, are gifts, and they're different from talents.
Yes.
So I remember going to be interim moderator, caretaker, minister to one of our black churches, George, that I was sent with the direction of the presbytery to decide with the congregation whether it should close down. It was in such a terrible state. So I had to introduce myself as, this is who I am, and I'm coming to decide whether the church closes down or not. But I said to them, please don't fight me. Try and love me and try and teach me who you are and what's this about. And two of the elders immediately seized on that, and they decided they would teach me. But they were older than me. The fact that I was white and a minister made no difference. For them, it was they were older and I was younger, and I was being asked to be taught. And George, the love that Frank and Stefili passed on to me in the 3 years that I was there, no talents. They were incredibly humble and simple men. The one had stuck up on the wall in his lounge, pride of place, his retirement certificate, even stating how much his monthly pension would be. That was the only gift he had ever got in acknowledging who he was. Wow. No great shakes in the world. But he would teach me. He would teach me how to go to funerals, how to sit quietly with people who were grieved. Yes. It was just remarkable what these two men gave me, in all these pure things of simply inviting me into their circle. And I remained silent, but boy, they gave me stuff of the kingdom of God, George.
Right.
So I think there's a huge difference between being a talented one who could write a book and tell me, follow these steps, Rod, and it'll be done, as opposed to two old men sitting with me.
Yes.
Giving to me of the kingdom.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Let me read a little quote that I have here. There's a distinction between talents and gifts. We have few talents but many gifts. Our gifts are the many ways we express our humanity. That's exactly what you're saying. Yes. They express their humanity in giving gifts to you, in teaching you. They are part of who we are. Friendship, kindness, patience, joy, peace, forgiveness, yes, gentleness, love, hope, trust, and many others. These are the true gifts we have to offer each other. What a lovely thing. Sure.
And it really happens. You may have experienced it with colleagues that we don't know each other very well, and you end up having to share a room at a conference or something, and the relationship becomes somewhat different. You're not competing for anything at all. You're just being with each other, and suddenly there's an amazing compassion. I remember when I was a chaplain in the army for that first year, George, the very first night, we were not given uniforms. We stayed in civvies, and I had a change of shirts, and I thought mine was creased, and I asked if I could borrow someone's iron to iron out my only change of shirt, and I burnt it. I'd never ironed before in my life. So that was it. I kind of hid it away and just wore the same shirt the next day. But a big, tall guy who became my friend, and he was just a very large man, Donnie Struvish was his name. He came to me and he said, Engelsman, Englishman, I better teach you how to iron. and he taught me how to iron. And that simple gift of love bonded me to him in a peculiar way. I almost felt like he was my protector at places. And then we discovered, George, that the best way to polish your boots was to shine them with a woman's pantyhose. If you could roll up pantyhose and use that silk stocking or whatever it's made of to shine. And of course, he was married. I wasn't at the time. So help me if after the first weekend away without me asking, he arrives back with 2 rolled up pantyhose from his wife. Give this to the Englishman for his boots. George, what is this except the kingdom of God?
How lovely. That sounds beautiful. So there's another thing here that took me by surprise. Henri is creating a link between our brokenness and our ability to give.
Yes.
Let me see. He says, there is a mysterious link between our brokenness and our ability to give to each other. The
Yes.
times of our lives where we feel like we have the least to offer are often the times that make us able to give more instead of less. Our brokenness opens us to a deeper way of sharing our lives and offering each other hope. Just as bread needs to be broken in order to be given, so too do our lives. Think of how we share meals together. If there's a conflict, the meal is torture. But where there is beautiful relationship, the meal is life-giving honor. Don't you think that our desire to eat together is an expression of our even deeper desire to be food for one another? Don't we sometimes say, this was a very nurturing conversation? That was a very refreshing time.
Yeah.
Brokenness.
So go on.
Well, I'm just making the point, the two together.
Well, we've had so many beautiful meals together over the years, and it's been great. And those experiences and what he's written here spark off to Proverbs 15, verse 17, that vegetables with love are much to be preferred than a calf with hatred, a fattened calf with hatred. And the simplicity of just being together in love is lovely. And then I really like this one, better a dry crust and peace better a dry crust with peace and quietness than a house full of feasting but strife. Now, being a Greek, I understand feasting and strife. And when my wife experienced it for the first time, she felt sick and too much food and too much fighting, and she just couldn't put those two together. Then a little anecdote about brokenness. I had to arrange a funeral this week of a very painful life of just 53 years, a woman, a mother, very painful life from 10 years old, and a very painful death, especially because of being shut out from COVID and no visitors and whatever. Her brother died several years ago, public knowledge, but he committed suicide, a young man. And their mother has just had such a long difficulty. And I wondered as we arranged the funeral how painful it would be and how needy she would be now having lost a second child. And George, she was so beautiful to the husband of her daughter, so deferential that this wasn't my daughter, this is your wife.
Wow.
So different as granny to the woman's son. This was your mommy, not my daughter. This was your mommy. And I came away thinking I had expected, because she's a strong person, strong personality, I had expected that pre-funeral interview and planning session to be hell of trying to put aside her needs with their real needs. And she just gave and gave and gave to them in the 2 hours that we were together. And I thought, this is a miracle of grace.
Yeah.
It is something really beautiful in our very midst, and also something that's happened in her life through the brokenness. So I could see it was there.
Yeah, I just wanted, before we move on, to make a remark relating to something that Henri Nouwen says, which I don't necessarily think is always true. He said, and we've talked about it, where there is strife, the meal can be torture, and it brought to mind something that happened last year. You and two colleagues and I go to lunch once a month, and we talk about our lives and the church, things like that, and it's really very soothing and a balm for me. But I was having a disagreement with one of those two colleagues last year at one point. We took a difference of opinion, and I felt very strongly about it, and to such an extent that we had words, the two of us. And I remember we had one of these lunches coming up, and I was really thinking maybe I shouldn't go, because I would actually have to be around a table with him. And But I took solace from the fact that there would be two other colleagues there to make conversation, and it couldn't be awkward at all. And in any case, just as at the beginning of the day, you sent a message through to say that for some reason you couldn't come to the lunch, And I thought, oh, okay, and the buffer zone is getting thinner. And as I was driving to the lunch, the other colleague pulled out too. So it was two of us who had words, and a very strong difference of opinion, sitting across the table from each other. And to my great surprise, and I don't think any of us is responsible, for the softening, but I felt a softening of the heart, and I think he did too. And at the end of the meal, we embraced. That was when you still could embrace.
Yes.
And we left on very different terms from the terms that we'd come. Now, there is a situation which was going to be awkward.
Yes.
But somehow, by God's grace, he's able to show you that what you have in terms of a friendship is so much deeper than this issue that you're taking a difference of opinion on. It was a profound experience for me. It's not the only time it's happened, but it certainly was one of the great examples.
And it was over the meal.
Yeah, it was over the meal.
The simple things of going through the meal, cutting, eating, salt, sharing salt. I mean, dare I say, the Holy Spirit's very sly. That you would set up the appointment over a meal and then knock out two people, so the two heavyweights are left in the ring together.
and the small talk gradually changes and it becomes more.
Yeah.
And then you ask about each other and how the family is, and you answer not just fine, and that softens. Because everybody's got things, and people are having
absolutely
things in the church, and eventually there's really no space to hide, and you have to talk about the thing you didn't want to talk about at all.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, George.
End up being softened, by the Spirit.
Really beautiful.
Okay, now you said I should rein you in if you go off on a tangent here, but we're coming to this inevitable place. That Henri Nouwen will write about in other books as well, and that is the connection between the action of giving and death, which he identifies in this context as the ultimate act of giving. And now let me just read one quote, so long, we'll keep the other one for just now. He calls death the final act of giving. And the question is, what does he mean by that? Does the idea that the death of the beloved bears fruit help in understanding this? He's talking about fruitfulness and death in the same sort of context. How do you see this, Rod?
Okay, let me start with something I don't like and disagree with, but I want to put it alongside something else he says that I completely agree with. So you listeners may think Rod's a bit schizophrenic at this point, but for better or for worse, I don't like when he wrote this, talking of those who've died. After their deaths, they are no longer inhibited from giving their full selves to us. They can send their spirits to us, and we can live in a new communion with them. Now, there are a whole bunch of things there that I actually don't like. I'm quite harsh about this, George, but I even dislike hearing ministers talk to the dead in a funeral service, like Rod's died, and we say, "Dear Rod, we're so pleased you're in a better place." And I'm very harsh about that. I've in fact corrected younger colleagues by saying, "You don't talk to the dead." But so I don't really like that. But I do completely agree with the next plus one or two sentences where he says, "None of this happens without preparation." And then he goes on to say, we can make death our final gift. And then a little further on, he writes this: our short lives can bear fruit beyond the boundaries of our chronologies, but we have to choose this. And now I begin to like what he said. I don't think my poor family is going to wait for my spirit to come back and inflict them any more than I've inflicted them at all in this life. But I think my death can be, if I know it's coming, and that's one of the beauties of being told that there's a terminal illness, if I can prepare for death, and I really know it's coming, or if I can live now in such a way that can prepare for death, then I can profoundly make this last thing called death a gift to others. So I wrote down in the margins of the book, Lord, please help me model a good death by the way I live now and the actual moment of dying. And please, I wrote this down, please release all those connected to me from any real or imagined obligations to me. Let me go and let them go their special way. And of course, I think that because that's the Spirit's work in me, but it's also the reflection of pastoral situations. When you've been at horrible places, horrible funerals, horrible exposures of what the will actually says and does to some people, and you realize there's control from the grave. How terrible is that? And there's anger, and there's the funeral tea is anything but joyful. So I think that we can prepare to go well, and that can be a profound gift, George.
Look, I have a few thoughts in response to that. First, you're a curmudgeonly old Protestant. That's what you are.
Yes, I am.
And secondly, what are we going to do with all the money we've raised for the shrine when you die? If we've been to be released from connectedness. But yeah, I understand that. It brought up a memory. Sasha's family on her father's side were Catholic. They're Belgians. And I remember one of the funerals we attended was when my father-in-law's sister died. And we went to the Catholic church in, Pinetown or one of those places there in Durban. And the priest addressed her. He said, Christiana, by baptism, Christ marked you and so on. And I found that very moving. Whether or not he was in fact addressing her or addressing her so that we could learn. But he mentioned the moments of sacrament. He talked about Holy Communion. He talked about the baptism. He talked about, the very last one he talked about was the sacrament of extreme unction. And at each of those, he explained the meaning for her. And that
I love that, George.
I
absolutely love that, and there are a couple of things about that. And he softened death completely, but because he has made every other point in her life sacramental, and therefore he's introduced Christ into that very, very place. So it's not, for me, it's not just her spirit that comes back, but it's the presence of the Spirit of God with us in these extreme times. And when the person has died well, then that becomes a blessing to all of us as God allows that to happen.
I've tried to think about this a little bit, Rod. Firstly, theologically, try to work out, how does Henri Nouwen conceive of death? Is it any different from the sort of mainline Western Church tradition? And the one thing I think of when I think of the significance of our death in Christ is that we are gathered into the divine life. That heaven, yes, whether it be a place or a state of mind, really what it is being gathered back to God in a profound and a tangible way instead of a distant way like it is now.
And with everyone.
And with everyone.
Into community, yes.
Into community, yes. And so basically Eden is reestablished. We are connected to God in a profound way, and He doesn't let us go. We are folded into His love. There's the perichoretic dance between Father, Son, and Spirit, and we are part of that. And that's what the Book of Revelation, why it's so beautiful. I love the Book of Revelation because it explains or it expresses that magnificent homecoming. Every tribe and every nation, the white robes washed in the blood and all that. Now, I'm trying to understand when Henri talks about giving, that our death is an act of generosity. I understand it from the point of relinquishment. We are giving up our lives. I mean, we may want to hold on to it, but when we let go, and I've had a few experiences of that, of people not really wanting to let go, and needing to work through that, when we let go, something beautiful happens, and we are taken into the presence of God, in the blink of an eye.
Yes.
But in what way is our death an act of generosity to others who remain? Do you get anything?
Well, I'm trying to establish that if he is saying there is an after-death possibility or availability for us after death to communicate with those left behind and to somehow give something to them, I disagree. I disagree with that. But I think the way we have just listening to you talk now, you are exemplifying and illustrating and actually teaching us the way to live, so that if you died, I would think about these words. I would think about your actions. I would think about the dinner parties, and I would continue to receive from your life. If you died disowning all that in a horrible way, if you lived in a niggardly, ungenerous manner, then your death brings no gift except thank God he's gone.
Yes. I understand. So that's fascinating to me, because not only does the quality of my life and the quality of my giving up life, not only does that have a bearing on eternity, but it also has a bearing on those who remain, because
Absolutely.
they reap and that's where the fruit comes in, not so the fruit.
Oh, George, I wrote down in the reading. This happens 2 pages later, where he talks about Elisha and the multiplication of the loaves and so on. But I wrote down what Jesus says on the feeding of the 5,000 in Matthew's account. It's Matthew 14, verse 16. They come troubled and they ask Jesus, what they're going to do about food, send these people away. And then he says this to them. This is Jesus to the 12. The crowd, do not need to go away to get food. You give them something to eat. Whoa, honest. Now, just if that became a lifestyle instruction, Rod, live in such a way that you are blessing others. Why? Because you're the beloved. You've got nothing to lose. You're beloved. Yes. So I've taken you. I've blessed you. I've helped you heal the brokenness to the point that you can make it redemptive. Now I'm sending you out you give them something to give. You give them something. Yeah. And suddenly that gives me dignity and worth and possibility. And, wow, it multiplies.
Yes.
The joy and the kingdom in our midst doesn't get added bit by bit. There's a multiplication of it.
Yes.
So, I think our death can really release people into saying, well, if he with all his difficulties could be that nice, man, we can live well there.
Yes.
And bless others.
And it's fascinating you should mention that reading, because I've been reading that very passage this week. And next week I've got to preach on it, and so I just thought I'd read it through a few times and think more broadly, because it's such a well-known passage and we've preached it so many times. So, and one of my favorites, Barbara Brown Taylor, she says the problem with us is and she's equating us with the disciples, is we think out of a position of scarcity. 2 fish, 5 loaves. Where Jesus thinks out of a situation of abundance, plenty of God, plenty of people sitting around, plenty of time, everything's plenty. And so what he does is he takes our scarcity and multiplies it in a way we can't pre-program, imagine, work out.
Absolutely.
The sums don't add up and everything. And everybody ends up eating and there's more left over and so on. And so maybe we should live our lives a little more like that. That God will provide.
Oh yeah, you touch off 2 anecdotes out of books, and also to add to this thought that our death can bless. So I don't know if you've ever read a book by James McBride called The Color of Water. His mother was a Jewish emigre from Eastern Balkan lands to America. And she ends up marrying, absolutely penniless when she arrives, she ends up marrying a black man in days of segregation who becomes a Baptist preacher. So this complete transition in her life, and they get moved from community to community, out of poverty and out of prejudice, and they have 12 children.
Wow.
And James, who becomes a journalist and author, asks his mommy one day, why are you one color and I'm another? And her answer is because God likes variety. And then he says, so what color is God? And that's the title of the book. She says, God's the color of water. It reflects everything around it. And here's the beautiful thing. That couple had 12 children, George. And that old black man and old Jewish woman lived and worked, and every one of their 12 children became postgraduates.
Wow.
How does that happen?
Yeah, some don't work out. Some don't work.
It's absolutely beautiful. And the other story, I can't remember the title of the book, and I just can't, as I sit talking to you, is of a mother, a single parent, bad marriage, divorced, whatever, single parent with 2 boys. And she insisted that they go to the library at least twice a week, and the kids had to take out 2 books, and they had to read them to her. Okay, so from early on, they were being taught at school, and she made them come. And the author, in a tribute to his mother, says, we both realized at one point that we read the books to mommy because mommy couldn't read.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that amazing? And it took them a long while to confront her that she couldn't read, and was simply literate by what she had seen.
Wow.
And the one son, on her death, he is by now a neurosurgeon in one of the New York hospitals. He dedicates most of his earnings to help other people learn to read and to get educated. And he himself puts 20 children through med school with his own earnings, coming out of his mother's gift of her death, life and death. It's life and death that becomes the gift. Yeah.
And of course, profound connection here between this death as a gift and Jesus' words in Matthew 10 and also Matthew 16, for whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. So this kenotic emptying out activity, this not hanging on and holding on, but open hands.
And it's in the doing of it that we discover that that's absolutely true. Hey? Yeah.
And he connects the whole theme about death and giving to Jesus. He says Jesus is given to the world. He was chosen, blessed, broken to be given. Jesus' life and death were a life and death for others. The beloved Son of God, chosen from all eternity, was broken on the cross, so that this one life could multiply and become food for people of all places and times. As God's beloved children, we have to believe that our little lives, when lived as God's chosen and blessed children, are broken to be given to others. We too have to become bread for the world. When we live our brokenness under the blessing, we spoke about that last time, our lives will continue to bear fruit from generation to generation. That is the story of the saints.
And that's us being sent into the world. When he prays for the church that's not yet, but will come, and that we will not be of the world, but be sent into the world as he's in the world. That alone is a reward from God, that my life here, not just over there in heaven, my life here is a reward just because he loves me, because I'm beloved. So every day this kind of sense of holiness, because all ground is holy because he's made it holy, because we meet with him, and then we go to bless others. It's what a life we've been given, George.
Yes,
we're so loved. And as we do it, we discover more and more this is exactly right. As we do it, we discover more and more. This is exactly what it means to be beloved. When he writes this, page 104, the whole world is only evil when you become its slave. As long as you live in the world, yielding to its enormous pressures to prove yourself to others that you're somebody, you will lose in the end, not just life, but all of life will just be a struggle to survive.
Yes.
Which is the antithesis of what you've just been saying, where we let the brokenness become the blessedness, and we give and are blessed to give even more. Just really absolutely beautiful. Yeah.
Well, I've got a little story, but before, I just wanted to ask, is there anything else that you wanted to, that came out for you from this section, Rod, before I tell my little story at the end?
George, I wrote down, I like to write prayers, as you know. I don't share all that I've written. I don't keep all that I've written, but I pray better when I write. And I wrote in prayer form, as we were going through this, whether I'm afraid to die, and what would that mean? And I wrote, quite honestly, no. The release to be fully loved, where I don't have to explain anything and not tempted to explain any longer. That's from now on, and that for me is a very wonderful thing, that death will bring that, the end of that battle of wanting to try and explain. And am I afraid to die? No, because I will see him who has made me his from start to everlasting and everlasting. And I will just be at home. So, but am I afraid to die? Well, I have no idea. So I want to make it a gift of giving and ask the Father to please help me to learn now whatever I need to learn, so that my dying will be a gift whenever that may come, whether it's suddenly or expected by way of pre-knowledge, like terminal illness or something. So now I want to live. I want to be taken and blessed and deal with the brokenness and give. And in death, I want to be able to give all, but discover I lose nothing. Lose nothing.
Yeah, it's an interesting question you ask, if one is afraid to die. And I've never felt afraid to die. You know that I lost both parents younger than perhaps they should have gone. And I remember when my father died, when I was 5 years old, I don't know what my mother did, but whatever she did, she instilled in me a lack of fear in the presence of death.
Very beautiful.
She told me that it would be fine, and she took me to the body. He had a heart attack in the car that wasn't driving. They put him down on the bed in the room while the undertaker was coming, and she got me to touch him. Now, what would come over that woman to bring that to her mind? But she did it.
Wonderful.
And instantly, I knew that it was okay, and it's carried me through life. And then, of course, she died, but I realized, in the last 10 years or so, that I probably expected to die young, because that was my experience. My father died when he was 40, and my mother at 56, and I've surpassed him. Well, in 9 years' time, I'll surpass her if I'm still around. Also, interestingly, our marriages, my mother never had a marriage of 20 years. I've had a marriage of 20 years. She had two marriages. The first one was about 15 or 16 years, and the second one was 17 or 18 years. Sure. But the fact is, you don't, when you pass it, then you feel a little bit disorientated. I'm still here. But Sasha gets irritated with me when I say that I'm not scared to die. And I say to her, and quite honestly, without any, pretense, I feel like I've lived more than one life already, with experience.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But that's to have.
Exactly. That's the fullness of the kingdom of God. That's absolutely beautiful.
And so to hang on to this life would feel to me a profound act of ungenerosity, of stinginess, of greed, because my gratitude comes out in a sense of freedom.
George, isn't it amazing that that's of you, in you, because of the kingdom of God, and so you don't hold on not wanting to die. You are happy to go and be with the Father, and that in itself is a gift of life to your family. So Cecil John Rhodes dies saying, "Still so much to do." And now, after all these years, even what he has done is being undone by people who say the manner of his living doesn't leave a good taste in our mouth. Why would we want to see his death as a gift?
Yes.
So we want to give thanks. Listen, yesterday would have been my mother's 95th birthday.
Wow.
And she also died early 50s with very suddenly, very big surprise for us. But she died having told us in many ways over the years, I don't want to die old, and I don't want to die with any regrets. And George, that's a gift, isn't it? I'm still given that. I still receive that from my mother. Yeah. Don't live with regret, Rods.
Yes.
Right, don't live with regrets.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's hear the story.
Yeah, let me tell a last story. So, after my mother's death in 1997, I had to choose a thesis topic to finish my studies at Rhodes, and I had started to read Henri Nouwen, especially because of that little book that you gave me called A Grief Observed. No, In Memoriam. I also read
In Memoriam.
C.S. Lewis, both of those at that time, basically to process, what was happening. And I was starting to think about what I would like to write about. And, when you're writing these things, you have to find sort of something new, something different. And I eventually wrote on compassion in Henri Nouwen's work. But something happened to me that I still haven't put down on paper. And I told you about this, but I haven't told those that are watching. So and I must find some opportunity one day to write about it. So in one of the books that Henri writes, I think it's in Bread for the Journey, he alludes to a vulnerability that is beautifully expressed by the trapeze artist in the circus. And he says we have to trust the catcher. And basically he tells the story of going to a circus with his niece who I think was Down syndrome, and the two of them sat there and watched the circus, and there were the clowns and there were this and that. But when the trapeze artist started to perform, something melted in Henri in the inside. And he had a sense that what he was seeing was actually an expression of something far more profound, which is the need to be vulnerable and to allow God to abandon ourselves to God's hands. And I thought that the connection with this giving ourselves, losing our lives is very important. And so Henri, he really wanted to write about this, and he felt it would be important for him to meet the trapeze artists. Well, it turned out that troupe of trapeze artists were in fact South African.
Yeah, from Cape Town.
The Flying Rodleys.
Yes.
So I searched high and low, and I found Rodley, and I think her name was Jenny Stevens, and they lived in Monte Vista. Yeah. And I made an appointment, and I went to have supper with them.
Wonderful, George.
And I asked them to tell me the story. And during the telling of the story, they took out an old VHS video cassette, and they played a clip of Henri doing the trapeze.
Oh, yeah.
They pulled the net up very high. I mean, Henri must have been, at least in his late 50s, if not early 60s by the time he did this. So they pulled the net up very high.
Yeah.
But they held on to him. They didn't throw him, but they swung with him. And Henri, like a child, swung on the trapeze.
That's beautiful.
And the tears were streaming down his face. And they told me how unbelievable this experience was, because here was this university professor wanting to learn how the trapeze worked. And first they thought he was taking them for a ride, and then afterwards they thought, well, we must do the best we can to allow him to experience. And they told the story of Henry on the trapeze. Rodley and Jenny Stevens. There were four. I think there was another brother or something like that. Two ladies, two men. But a South African group, and I had supper with them, and they told me this incredible story of trusting the catcher.
Yes.
Because the trick is, if you are the flyer, the one who's going to do the fancy things, your wrists must be limp. You cannot make them firm, because when you're caught, your wrist will break.
Wow.
So you have to have limp hands, and you let go, and you just hold out your arms, and the catcher does all the work. You do nothing. You just go, gravity and, inertia and all that take you.
Yes.
And limp hands, and the catcher does the work. And that is the story of God and us. He is the great catcher.
Yeah.
And when we give our lives away, when we don't consider our lives something to be grasped, and when we give our lives away even in death, we say, it's all right, I trust you.
Yeah.
I'm assured of a soft landing.
Yeah.
Then the catcher does his work.
Absolutely beautiful.
That's really what the fancy business is all about.
Yeah.
Well, I've enjoyed these conversations.
I
think I'm going to miss them.
Be beautiful, George. Been absolutely beautiful.
Now, I want to say that you say I'm a giver. Well, your life is shot through with generosity, and you have given me so much. Thank you.
Bless you, George.